Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Using Surveys to Understand Your Service, Research and Practice Perspectives. My name is Kat Goldsworthy and I'm a Research Fellow in the Evidence and Evaluation Support Team at the Australian Institute of Family Studies. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, who are the traditional owners of the lands in Melbourne where I'm speaking from today. I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to elders and First Nations people joining us online today and on the panel today. Before I introduce my guests and we get into our discussion, I do have a little bit of housekeeping. So at the end of the discussion, there will be a live Q&A, and if you've got a question, you can submit that question in the question section of the GoToWebinar dashboard. This webinar is being recorded, and if you'd like access to it, it will be available in about 2 weeks' time. So you can either get the recording straight on our website, or we'll also promote it through aifs newsletters. And if you'd like to subscribe to that, you can go to the aifs website and find the subscribe button beneath the aifs banner. There will be some related resources that we mentioned during the webinar, and you'll be able to find those in the handout section of the GoToWebinar dashboard. So there'll be things that we either mention, or they might be resources that you can access just to do some further reading about the subject. And finally, there will be a short feedback survey that will open at the end of the webinar, and we'd really appreciate it if you just take a very short amount of time to complete that. So today we're going to talk about a topic that comes up really frequently in the conversations that I have with service providers, and that's how to integrate surveys into your service. And in particular, I'm interested in integrating surveys that are designed to collect evidence of client outcomes. And I know that surveys can be used for all sorts of reasons, and no doubt that those things will come up in today's discussion as well. But yeah, I'm quite interested in the client outcomes aspect. So we're running this webinar to coincide with 2 practice guides that we released this week on using surveys to collect data and writing surveys for beginners. And those resources, again, they'll be in the handout section of the GoToWebinar if you would like to read them after this. So we've pulled together a really exciting panel of speakers today who are going to share their perspectives with us from their different roles that they've got. Unfortunately, Lorna Samuels, who was going to be joining us today, she's unable to, but she does send her apologies. We're very lucky, though, to have her colleague Celeste Regan, who's here, and she'll be able to sharing her practice, experience and perspective from the work that she does at VACA. So the panellists' bios are available in the handout section of the GoToWebinar dashboard, so I won't go over them now, but I will ask each person to introduce themselves and just give us a bit of an outline of how they use surveys to collect data in their organisations. So Rhonda, I'd really like to start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. So hi everyone, I'm Rhonda. I work at Mallee Family Care in Mildura, and I work in a range of programs that work in the early years space, but specifically, I guess, relevant to this webinar is around our supported playgroups that we deliver in the Mildura and Bullock areas, so quite kind of rural communities. And we use those surveys to collect our data around our outcomes around our playgroups under the DSS funding. So we're actually using those surveys with parents and children to see what kind of impact our playgroups are having. I would also, before I move, so I would just like to acknowledge the people of the Millewa Mallee, which is the lands that I live on, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging as well.
Thanks, Rhonda. I'm going to throw to Celeste next.
Thanks, Kat. Hi, yep. So my name's Celeste Regan. I'm the Family Services Training Lead at Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Agency. We use outcomes measurement tools or surveys with the families that we work with at VACA. So it's based on our organisational framework. It's got some aspects of whether our service is meeting the needs for the children and families. We also use them as a motivational tool and for goal setting, and to ensure that culture and connection to culture is at the forefront of our work with the children and families accessing family services at VACA.
Thanks, Celeste. Great to have you. And Kate, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yes, thanks, Kat. Hi, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge that my feet are on the lands of the Yagara people. And for many years, I was a member of an applied research program at Griffith University here in Brisbane. It was focused on creating positive pathways to child wellbeing, and the project was action-oriented and community-based, and it operated in partnership between the university, local schools and community organisations. And part of my role was to work with our community partners to make sure we had reliable ways to gather information about how the families and the children in the community were going, because we needed consistent processes for capturing the voices of children and families so we could understand whether our work was making a real difference in their lives. And so as the project unfolded, we developed some specific measures ourselves to focus everyone's attention on children's social and emotional well-being and on parents' sense of empowerment and confidence. And we spent a lot of time developing, validating and using those measures in our Pathways project. So we didn't want all that learning to be to just end when the project ended. So the measures were certainly, they came out of research, but they were designed for real people to use in their own real world settings. And so we wanted to share them beyond our project. And that's why we set up an initiative called Real Well. It embeds the measures into online user management systems to help practitioners anywhere use them independently.
Thank you, Kate. And no doubt, I'm sure a lot of people joining us today will be very familiar with those tools that you created and worked on, because they certainly come up a lot in conversations that I have, but you might touch on some of those a bit later. Okay, well, thanks everyone. Let's get started. The first question I wanted to throw to you all is around something that I'm seeing a lot when I'm working with service providers in my role, and that is that there's this real tension between collecting data for compliance purposes, and what I mean by that is collecting data that basically is for reporting requirements that just get fed to funders to meet their requirements and needs. And so the tension between doing that and then collecting data that's actually meaningful for your programs and your services. And so, collecting data that answers a question that you might actually have about the service or about clients and communities. And I know it can be really difficult to try to use surveys and implement strategies that cover off on both things. And it can be really frustrating for people and difficult to navigate. So I just wanted to get your sense and your advice on how do you balance these things in your organisations, your experience in managing these particular things. So Celeste, have you got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. So the outcomes tools that we use at VACA, we do use which is largely part of our reporting requirements, and we need to use it to meet those requirements, but it's not necessarily a culturally safe tool, and there are fairly so some practitioners and some staff that don't favour this tool so much. So a big strategy that we implemented to use this tool was to develop some culturally safe approaches and resources and really embed it within our training and practice development and capacity development with our family services practice lead as well. And a lot to do with that training was about identifying the ways in which we could use that tool as a strength in terms of advocating for families and using that data in a meaningful way. So a good implementation strategy, good training, and consistent and continuous practice development with the use of those tools has been a real key to make it relatable for practitioners in their practice and to support their work and align it with the other pieces of their work that it would support.
So it sounds like that people then had an opportunity to kind of air their maybe grievances around that particular tool and then come up with some other ways or or try to understand how that kind of fit into a bigger picture, and then have kind of add on to that as well, so it was meaningful to them. Am I right in that interpretation?
Yeah, most definitely. So the training that we facilitated for the use of that tool and our own tool, it was a very interactive training, and then we did some regional visits to each office and did some capacity building with all the practitioners, where they, had the opportunity to voice their concerns or any barriers or issues they face with using the tool. But then, yeah, it's obviously a big part of that is saying, well, if you look at all aspects of practice and how much this tool can inform those other aspects, and making it relatable to those pieces of work, so that it's not, I suppose, seen as an add-on or extra work that's not necessary. And yeah, really trying to highlight that when we're doing those sessions with practitioners.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. I guess it just shows that there are opportunities within things that might at first glance not look great, but there may always be opportunities to adapt and evolve them. Yeah. Thanks, Celeste. Kate, do you have any thoughts on managing these two tensions? Because you obviously come from sort of a research background, where I imagine, you're quite interested in collecting the meaningful program data, and you've worked with organisations, I think. So I don't know if you've come up against this tension in the work that you've been doing and how you've sort of navigated it.
Yes, indeed. And, I think it is concerning when people see requests from funding bodies as the main reason for collecting data. And I worry that might suggest that they don't feel supported. I certainly think that, is true. But I know, and as Celeste's just been describing, a lot of services and organisations do take a lot of care to prepare everyone for data. And I believe that's the key to finding that balance between, other people's needs and your own needs. So it's turning the challenge into an opportunity for capacity building, as Celeste's been talking about, really. Because good measures obviously lends itself to use in program evaluation, but it can be also a valuable aid to practice and program planning. And I like to think that surveys, I kind of think of them as listening tools or conversation starters, because the items in a survey can offer a nice structure for framing discussions with your clients, and they can highlight areas where people feel strong, as well as where they might feel, or they might welcome some timely support. So the data they provide can, be a great guide for tailoring your the way you work with your clients. But maybe I think what we do need to do is get better at acknowledging what's involved in that whole process, and people need time, training, organisational support, etc., to make sure the use of the data, it's quality data, and it becomes part of the DNA of the continuous improvement process at the service. When a service offers an evidence-based program, there's no doubt that they'll provide practitioners with training before they implement the program. And I think the same principles need to apply to the way people are prepared to use surveys and other data collection methods. It's not just surveys. So I hope down-to-earth training and sort of mentoring how to make use of surveys and the data they provide will become the norm, and help people take control of the data and use it for their own purposes.
Yeah, I think there's such important points to raise, because I do, I think that a lot of people just kind of give, given these surveys, particularly if there's a compliance element to it, and just told to go away and do it. And there's not often other conversations that happen around that. So it's really good to hear that, in order to potentially get really good quality data and get good use out of surveys, there is actually all of these other elements that usually need to be involved. Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Kate. I think I'm going to go to my next question, and I'll come to in a minute, Rhonda, because some of the things you're talking about, both Celeste and Kate, is that it sounds like, you're using surveys in this way to build relationships with people, to have a conversation, which, presumably gives you real-time data and enables you to make, to inform your decision-making kind of on the spot. But it sounds like it's could be quite a time-consuming process if you're doing those surveys with each individual in a one-on-one sort of setting. I guess a lot of the questions that we get is, how is there such a thing as, this magical short survey that we can just give out to people and deliver in kind of an efficient way, and it will give us all the kind of data we need. It will tick up on all our boxes. Does that exist? Rhonda, I might bring you in at this point.
Sure. Short answer is no, there isn't actually a quick fix. And I know this because at one stage in the last 12 months, we ourselves thought surely there's an easier and a quicker way of doing this. And we did a whole heap of research to see what else is out there. And what we actually discovered was that what we are doing is useful and is meaningful and does meet all of our purpose, that we want to have. So I think really, once again, following on from what Kate and Celeste have already said, it's around the way we use the surveys and how we're using the information that we get. It needs to be purposeful. If you are just doing the surveys to tick some boxes and to file them away and enter them into your data portal, and you never look at them again, and it's not guiding what you're doing, I just wonder how useful that is. So then it's balancing when we talk about that tension around how is it being purposeful and meaningful for families as well as the business that we're doing and what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of touching on what Kate said earlier, going back to that purpose and trying to get something out of it, not just doing it for a tick the box process. So I know that is really challenging, and it's going to look different in different organisations because some organisations are very focused on compliance and don't necessarily have the resources and capacity to kind of delve a little bit deeper. But I think it's a good thing to strive for, isn't it? And Rhonda, so was that a conversation? Have you always operated in that way?
Yeah, so I would say we've had a great, I think our values as an organisation are around that evaluation is meaningful, that data is meaningful, and that we don't just do things for the sake of them, for the sake of doing it, because that's what a funder says. So what the philosophy we try and take across the whole organisation is, yes, there are some things we have to do that our funders ask us to, but how can we make that meaningful, and how can we make that part of our practice into, our everyday practice, so that we're getting to know clients and it's actually a tool for us, not just a tool to meet compliance. So that we've had that value, and then part of my role has been helping staff with that and thinking about, well, how do I make this useful for them? How do they make this useful for families so that we're not just running through a process?
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of similar to what Celeste was saying earlier. I'm curious, Celeste, is short surveys something that you guys at VACA are concentrated on, or you're more interested, do you have a short survey that you use? Is that something that actually works in practice, it can give you all the things that you need, or?
Yeah, so with our VACA community outcomes survey, we did develop a VACA brief community outcomes survey, but that's not what we use within our practice. That's to support our mainstream colleagues that are doing work with Aboriginal families. So yes, there's a brief survey that exists, but in practice, whether or not it's brief, I'm not sure. We encourage our pracs to have more of a conversational style approach with families to get that really meaningful information or data, but not just for that purpose, because we want it to really be centered around what the family wants to get out of the service, what their goals are, and support them in identifying areas that that they need or want more connection in or to. But in short, I suppose I don't think that you can go and do a survey with a family or a client and get any sort of meaningful response that's going to support them and the organisation and the practitioner within, a one-off visit in a 20-minute, half an hour time frame. We say, you know, life happens, and for example, if someone's, you know, the parent of 5 children or even 2 children, however many children, and they've got other priorities on their mind at the time, then that data's not going to generally be quality or meaningful for any party involved. So we encourage deep listening and practitioners to really take the time that's needed to get those responses with families.
And you find that works well in practice when you do that?
Yeah, most definitely. I think it refers back to what we're talking about before, relating the tool to other pieces of work, and also explaining to the family the use of that tool and using that as a motivational tool as well, or as a conversation starter, as I think Rhonda was saying before.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, I guess what I'm hearing is, you know, the reason I sort of asked that question is people do ask us that a lot about where do we get this short survey? How can it deliver on everything? And I think the reason that people want that is because, you know, it saves time when they've got very limited time, obviously, or it's used to save time, but also it can, you know, it doesn't maybe potentially burden the client as much potentially. But what I'm hearing you guys say is actually investing in the time up front potentially, you know, save time later down the track. Or not time, but it actually is a worthwhile thing, because it might mean that you create, you know, establish better rapport and trust and connection with the person that you're working with, and you're actually able to get that engagement. Because I imagine that in the work that you're doing, you know, it's not just one-off surveys that you're doing, you're potentially using these tools at different time points as well across the relationship with the client. Is that right?
Yeah, yep. So we, within our program, family services programs, majority of them will take 3 points of collection. But yeah, in terms of engagement, I think that specifically our community outcomes survey, because it focuses on domains such as heal, protect, and connect, and is really culturally centered, you know, that information really underpins where the family can start to heal, and potentially, you know, the issues that have impacted them, that have brought them into the situation where they're needing to access a service at that point in time. If we look at issues that have impacted Aboriginal communities and people, then definitely you can relate that the intent and the meaningful response that you could get from that client or family when using that survey can really underpin a strong source of not only source of engagement, but work to build trust and start some really meaningful work that's going to inform long-term healing and change for families and children.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering what role sort of research and evidence plays into developing surveys, and how important that is. You know, you've worked on these tools that you've developed, the PEAM tool and Rumble's Quest. I'm sure you can talk more about those, because we've already had, you know, people asking about those already. But I'm just curious as to, yeah, how important do you think it is to have sort of standardised and validated type measures when we're using surveys around client outcomes? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think if you need to collect information about something that a valid and standardized measure has already been developed to address, I'd suggest you use that, because there's not necessarily any reason to reinvent the wheel. Take advantage of the hard work that others have already done. You know, you were talking about magic wands before, and I'd like to believe in magic, but people who develop reliable measures don't have magic wands. What they have probably is years of training and deep knowledge of the content area that their survey is designed to address, and that training will have also provided them with an understanding of both the art and the science of survey design. And they've probably also spent a lot of time, as we did, in developing the PEAM and Rumble's Quest, conducting ethically approved research studies to validate the measure, to test its reliability, and to explore its performance with a very large representative group to develop some norms as a general reference guide for scoring. And honestly, maybe not always, but I think in most surveys and measures that are suitable for use in family support practice, they'll have been developed. These surveys, even though a researcher might have developed it, they'll have developed it in collaboration with the kind of people who it's designed to be used with. So, I think as Celeste has been saying, really the magic is not the survey itself, it's more the way you use it, and I'd focus on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those messages are definitely coming through kind of loud and clear, and I think are often forgotten aspects when we talk about surveys, very focused on the actual tool itself, and again, not things that sort of sit around it. I think you've probably already covered this already, but I did want to get your perspectives, and Rhonda, it'd be interesting to hear from you on this around how do we get people to, how do we boost our response rates effectively when we're doing surveys? I mean, you work in playgroup environments, and obviously there's probably a lot of people dropping in and dropping out, and I'm hearing loud and clear that, relationships are a very clear part of this. But are there other things that we need to consider when we're trying to get people to complete the survey? People want to give the data, they want the data for themselves to make sense of it, but they want to give those numbers as well to funding bodies. Have you got any advice or experience in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, once again, what's most helpful to get engagement for families in this process is to actually make it meaningful for them, and that make it sure that they understand the purpose of why we're collecting the information. So often families can feel judged around why we're asking some of these questions, and then particularly if we're not using that to actually build that relationship or engage them, they kind of feel like they're being done to. They're a bit of an experiment. So I think the main way is to be upfront and clear around why we're collecting that information and what we're doing with it. And I think that the other one is to build it into that day-to-day practice, as we said, beyond the tool, to actually look at it. So for example, we do with our playgroups, because you do often have that coming in and out and things like that, we've built that process into our intake. So when a family first starts, we send them a bit of a welcome letter to playgroup saying, hey, welcome to playgroup. We're going to catch up with you in a couple of weeks, and we'd love to get to know you better. So then the practitioners will meet with the family and they'll have a chat, and they'll just talk about, hey, we just want to get to know you and your child. What kind of things do you want to get out of playgroup? Is there anything that you want to share with us that will help us to kind of, meet your needs? So it's that kind of conversational type thing. And then we actually deliver the survey as that conversation style, as like what Kate was saying, is that using the PEAM as a bit of a framework for the conversation. Sometimes the questions can throw them a little bit, so it's part of that, just having that as a dialogue and helping them to unpack some of the questions and to maybe think about what that means for them. And then something that's been really useful that we've started to do is to actually have some questions at the end after we've asked those survey questions, to kind of say something so it becomes meaningful again for the family. So it'll be something like, so out of all of these things that we've kind of talked about today, are there any of these that you're actually, want to think about, or that you might need some support with? So then they can identify areas that they might want a bit more information or something that they're struggling with, and then we can help connect them to the supports that they need. And I think that helps them to see the value of that conversation, rather than just, I've answered some questions and it's put away in a file. we also use that opportunity to highlight their strengths, because a lot of the families we're working with, the parents and carers we're working with, they can feel quite judged. So we take the opportunity that perhaps if they've identified something that they're doing really well through that survey, that we have a chat around that too and really help to bring that out. So that can be a really useful way, and I think it's just then they're not as threatened by that experience, and then when we go to do the post-survey later, they're kind of not seeing that as much of a threatening experience.
Yeah, you raise a really good point there about, you know, it being a two-way relationship. You know, it's not just trying to think about it in that way of not just taking information for our own purposes, but what can you give back? I think that's a really beautiful message and something that, you know, we probably could all benefit from thinking about a little bit more. Celeste, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that, just because, you know, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have traditionally been over researched and data's just been taken and, you know, not potentially used for the benefit of those communities. So what kind of training do you give to your staff? What are the conversations that you're having around trying to frame surveys and how the data is going to be used and those things with families? Do you have any?
Yeah, I definitely agree that that's an issue that Aboriginal children and families would face a lot. So it's about being really, really careful not to assume that they have to do the survey, so get it done. But you also have to be very transparent at the same time and say, you know, we do collect this data. I would probably not even use the word data with them, because
what would you say?
Gather some information to support our work with you and help us get more resources in the future and shape our programs to build a stronger community, using sort of that more, I suppose, scientific language doesn't generally sit well and might make people feel like an experiment. But yeah, I think it's about being really transparent, that yes, we will collect the data, but at the same time, you know, that it's safe, like it'll be safe with us. It's not, you know, we're there to advocate and use it in a really meaningful and sensitive and purposeful way. So it's about being transparent. Yeah, and using it as a motivation. So as Rhonda was saying, like, you know, and it might not always be the case that it's a motivation, but you use your follow-up collection point either as a motivational tool and say, oh, look how much you know, how much better you're feeling about your connection to country or community now, as opposed to when we first caught up with this survey. And, you know, maybe if they're not feeling as confident or less confident in that area, then it's a good conversation starter to say, well, what do we need to change? How can we further support you to you know, feel more confident and more comfortable in that space? So yeah.
Yeah, really, that's really valuable. I think having some of those script starters can help people as well, you know, like people often want to know how do I start these conversations? What do I actually say here? So thanks, I really appreciate that. I'm conscious we've only got about 10 minutes left of this discussion, so I'm going to move on to the next thing, which is I'm curious. I think you might have touched on this a little bit before, Rhonda, but and we've talked a lot about surveys as a tool of relationship building, but yeah, how do we create that buy-in, I guess, from practitioners and actual people administering the surveys? That's a really important part of this too. And I'm running some focus groups at the moment, and some of the feedback that we keep getting through those focus groups is that, you know, we just need our practitioners and our people collecting the data. They don't understand necessarily always the importance of collecting the data, and that's can be a real barrier. Or they're not involved in the design of these things and the development of it, the decision making around it. So I just wanted to, hear from all of you about how do you yeah, how do you create that buy-in basically from people actually doing the survey work? Who would, Rhonda, you're smiling at me. I'll throw to you first.
Yeah. Yes, so sure. So just as we're saying it needs to be meaningful for the families that we're working alongside, it also needs to be meaningful for the people who are delivering the surveys. If they're just the people that are like, please fill in this survey so that we can file away and put in the data, and then they don't get to understand the purpose of that, then it's going to feel like an add-on and extra. So a lot of what we do is a couple of different things, but one is actually talking to them about so a lot of people are anxious about doing it too, because they can think it's intrusive and that, you know, they might raise some things for families, and then they worry about how they're going to support families. What we've found though is having the opportunity, a little bit of support to maybe you know, do a bit of role play or to watch a bit of modelling of how you can do that as a conversation style can really help to kind of take those fears away. And also talking about what are they finding difficult, like what is it that they find challenging about that, and often it's around that awkwardness from their own point of view. But then what happens is, as they start to do them, they actually do feel a bit more confident. And what's coming out is they see the value and the impact that conversation style has had on that family. And so a lot of the practitioners will actually reflect later to say, I actually know so much more about that person now than when I could possibly have known just through our conversations in playgroup. So I think once again, they see the purpose for them and how meaningful that is in the work that they do. The other thing is we try and share the data back with them. So when we actually collect the data and we are looking at our results to see, you know, how has that gone, we try and share that back with the staff and kind of help them and say, oh, what do you think that's telling? What's the story behind this? What do we think's happening here, and get them to contribute to that discussion. And then they may actually identify some areas of work that they want to focus on in the next 12 months because, you know, maybe, you know, they've noticed a theme and that they're noticing lots of our parents are feeling like this, and it can actually guide their practice. So I think, once again, it needs to be purposeful for the staff who are implementing those surveys.
Yeah, it's obviously taken a lot of time to have that sort of inclusive sharing approach, which sounds really wonderful. Kate, you've done a bit of work in helping around the implementation of tools. Did you have anything you wanted to add on this particular question about creating that buy-in and building the confidence, I suppose?
Yes, so yeah, as we've all been saying, surveys don't always feel like the most instinctive way to help clients tell their stories. So the million-dollar question that we're all how to help people move from that awkward sense where it just doesn't feel natural to us, you know, to use a set of surveys to guide a conversation to the point where, you know, they do feel comfortable about it. And I actually don't have the million-dollar answer, but I do know that spending time with your teammates, you know, to do some training, share ideas, role play, like Rhonda's been saying, and practice together, that's a really good start. And I think when you practice together as a team, role modeling is a really good idea, because when you see something, it can be quite powerful. You know, talk about it forever, but when you see it, it really can come home, I think. And something we've recently done to support the way people use the PEAM is to produce a couple of videos that model different ways of introducing the PEAM in practice. One of them gives just a nice example of how to use it in a standard but respectful way, but the other one models the process of threading the questions through a natural conversation. And that second video really tries to focus on the purposeful use of PEAM in strengths-based practice. So it also models the way conversations around the items provide practitioners with opportunities to offer reassurance to their clients, acknowledge the challenges that they may be feeling, but also to recognise their strengths and and in the responses that they are giving. And also because it's always very uplifting, as Rhonda was saying, to end a conversation with a positive step. That video also shows the way the discussion can prompt on the spot opportunities to set out some takeaway plans and steps for achieving them. We're going to try and add those new videos sometime soon to the Real Well resource guide that people who've registered licensed to use PIN can access via their online management dashboards, but we haven't had the opportunity to do it yet, but it should be there soon.
Great, thank you. And just for everyone, people that aren't familiar with the PAIM tool, okay, what does that stand for? Can you just...
Parent Empowerment and Efficacy Measure.
Thank you. Yeah, and yeah, we'll share those things in the related resources as well if you want to know more. Yeah, thank you. I think it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, we're talking a lot here about trying to build confidence and do all this role playing that I'm personally not aware of. Where do people get that training? You know, if it's not, I mean, it's great, Kate, that you guys have done that work, and if people are licensed and using those tools, they'll potentially be able to access that help. But do you know if that's something that anyone offers in terms of getting training around doing, you know, administering these tools and having confident, you know, being confident in conversations with clients around collecting data? Are you guys aware of anything that exists like that?
I think it comes down to the organisation. I'll jump in, but please, you know, obviously Rhonda and Celeste will know better from their perspective, but I think it probably just comes down to the organisation to decide, yes, we're going to do this. I do know of a couple of organisations who do, and they've asked me to give workshops, for instance, but I'm not sure what happens.
I guess.
Celeste, oh, sorry, Rhonda, I just interrupted you.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, I think you're right, Kate. But and we don't necessarily haven't had external people come in, but we have some great strengths within our team. And I actually think the practitioners who are delivering the surveys anyway do have those skills. They just need to see that they know how to build relationships with people. So they actually have some great skills already, and it's just more the context of the survey is what probably throws them. And once you remind them that the skills that they actually have already in building those beautiful relationships are what you need, then that can be really helpful. So, you know, so yes, I think you can get in some expert help if there isn't anyone in the team, but really a lot of people who work in this field know how to build positive relationships with people.
And I think it's better to do it in-house if you can. That's way better.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great message, Rhonda. Celeste, I was just because you know you're in charge of doing all the training and that sort of thing at BACA. What do you guys do?
So I think we're pretty lucky here at BACA at this point in time. So we've got myself as a training lead, then we have our practice lead, and we have a central reform and implementation team. So just adding to the points that Kate and Rhonda had made, I think it's, you know, training is really important, but at the same time, what's going to stand the test of time and have that continuous improvement kind of effect is embedding the culture of that. It's not just facilitating or developing a training around it and facilitating it. It's supporting staff, supporting team leaders to feel confident in running sessions with their team in, you know, whether it be a role play or whatever kind of methods that they want to use. It supports them in their learning and they're feeling comfortable. It also supports consistency in administering the surveys and the data collection side of things. So it's more about embedding a culture within the workplace as well of you know, strong leadership and people feeling confident to continuously have these sessions with their staff and support them when they are feeling not so confident with the tools.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kat, the other thing I would add is just also I think that have a go. That's how we learn everything, isn't it? Is you have a go at doing something. You might not get it 100% the way you liked it, but then you learn from that experience and then it helps you to hone your practice, you know. So I think this whole, sometimes we can go in thinking we need to be perfect when we're doing this, but actually just using it as a chance to learn ourselves around what works and what doesn't. And we also ask our families after the surveys around, was there anything around, you know, this process that, you know, you have feedback around, so that we can start to learn what works for you and what doesn't.
And I think as well, just adding on to that, is having a feedback loop. So, you know, we obviously at VACA want Aboriginal people and community informing the development of these tools, but we need to have an ongoing feedback loop so that when our team that develops these tools goes to refresh that tool, or, you know, have a look at it and see if there's any improvements that need to be made, that we have all that opportunity for collection of, you know, what's really maybe not appropriate or working within practice, so that it then again feeds back to practitioners that they're heard and supported, and that continuous improvement is managed really well.
Yeah, thank you. I think I mean, those are really beautiful notes to end this discussion on. And we're already at the time where we're going to be throwing to questions, unfortunately, because, you know, I feel like the topic about using surveys, you know, it feels like it could have been very technical. It feels like, you know, it could have been a very straightforward conversation, but actually there's just such you know, a skill set around this, and so many aspects that can really elevate our survey use, which you've already touched on. And I love the idea of just having a go, because we don't have to get it right. I think just being open and transparent and upfront about what we're doing, and, you know, having a really crystal kind of clear purpose, and hopefully having some good culture around us as well to support good survey use is the way to go. So thank you all so much. I'm going to jump into the questions. There's, not surprisingly, there's been a lot of questions coming through, but the one that I'm going to start us off with is something that, again, I hear a lot in other conversations that I have with service providers, and it relates to creating and adapting surveys for different groups of people, and in this case, we're talking children. You know, people, I guess that's not very surprising, because there is a huge interest in listening to children and collecting their feedback and, you know, getting their input and hopefully responding to that feedback and their voices as well. But I know from my own research that surveys aren't always that suitable for using with children, particularly very young children. I wanted to get your perspective on that. Have you used surveys with children before? What did that look like? How did it go? Or has it not really been on the cards for you? Kate, I might start with you, just because I know you have experience in working with kids and outcomes measures.
Yeah, well, it's a big question. Now, I obviously do feel very strongly about the importance of using client voice to guide goal setting and service provision. And my personal philosophy is that to support someone, we need to understand them, and to understand them, we need to listen to them. But to listen to them, we need to provide them with a good way to tell their own story and share information with us, and that is especially true for children. So the onus is really on us as practitioners or whoever, researchers, to find a good way to let kids talk, let kids speak. And it really isn't easy to develop something that's genuinely age appropriate for young children. We actually spent I can't even tell you how many years, a long time, developing a measure of social and emotional well-being for primary school age children, and it focuses on things that are key to their well-being, like attachment to school, self-concept, the way they manage their emotions and behaviours, where they get along with their peers, how they feel supported by the grown-ups in their life, and so on. There is really so many things to consider, but our solution was to embed the validated set of questions into a computer game. The process really offers that same opportunity to have a guided conversation like we were talking about before, but this time it's done through a game, which is called Rumble's Quest. And in the game, the child goes on an adventure with this mythical creature, and they help Rumble to discover who he is and where he belongs. And as he's learning about himself, he asks the kids about their world and their feeling. So the context of the story takes the questions out of the abstract, so the children can understand them and respond in a way that's genuinely reflects their thoughts and feelings. But, as I said, that took 10 years. That took 10, you know, that's not something that most people have, you know, are able to do, especially if they need to do something next week, you know, with kids. So I don't know what a good quick answer is, but with little kids, normally surveys are not a very effective means of talking to them.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the other things I've read that you've touched on is like when you're working with kids, it is about trying to make it fun and engaging and trying different things, which, you know, that Rumble's Quest sounds like it would be a really fun thing to do.
It's fun and engaging, but it's also meaningful, and I think that's the key. Comprehension at that age is it's really important that they know what you're asking them so that they can give you the right, you know, not the right answers, but the answer that they genuinely feel. I mean, in using Rumble's Quest, I've been in situations where I've been called over by a little child who said, I didn't mean to say that. Can you tell Rumble I didn't want to say? They really want to tell what they really feel, and if they feel like they can't go back and change their answer, they are upset. So understanding is key. It's not just a fun thing, it's buy-in and helping them understand.
So yeah, maybe testing out some questions if people are developing surveys for an older cohort is really making sure that comprehension is there and that you're taking the time to make sure that kids are able to kind of come back to those questions and give those meaningful answers. Yeah, thanks. Celeste, is this something that you guys do in your work at all? Is surveying children?
Yeah, so we haven't at this stage got a specific community outcome survey for children. However, we do have practice guides and templates that are centered around the child's voice. So we try and really embed that within practice. But then I suppose there's other considerations when you're thinking about surveying children and how it could be sometimes difficult or influenced ethically. Obviously you need their parents around, but then their responses might be influenced with others around as well. So it's trying to really balance that approach when you're working with children to encourage them to feel safe in communicating what their thoughts and feelings and needs are, and doing it in a creative way that can, really create that safe space for them.
Yeah, very sage advice. All right, we've got a few other questions. I'm going to try and get through a couple of them. I'm wondering if you have any advice for using surveys with clients that really don't want to. I mean, the answer is probably don't do it. But I know that, I guess I'm thinking in the context of, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, but in the context of people being very over-surveyed, and also, you know, with clients are often attending multiple different services, and they're all asking questions, they're all being asked for data. I imagine it's, again, about relationship building, but have you had experiences with this and how have you navigated that, I guess? Rhonda, I might start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, and that is a big question the practitioners will ask themselves. So first of all, yes, it goes back to the relationship building, and that if they feel safe to have those conversations, they are more likely to engage in that process. But at the same time, we do have families sometimes where we feel we could do more damage to them putting them through that process than what is needed. So we will make a decision around, is it appropriate? Like our philosophy is, if it's not going to be meaningful and useful and potentially cause damage, we're not doing it. So we need to keep that ethical framework there as well. So I think usually if you put those strategies in place about making it meaningful for the family, making it purposeful, they 9 times out of 10 actually do reflect that they quite enjoyed that conversation or that they got something out of it. But occasionally there are families that are experiencing such complexity and so many things that would just be too overwhelming. And we as practitioners have an ethical obligation to make that judgment around if that's safe to do or not.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. All right, we've got about 4 minutes. I'm just going to move on to the next one, which is, this is a really interesting question. Someone's asked if we've got any advice on managing integrity in data collection when client bias might come into play. And I'm not really sure exactly what this person is asking around client bias, but, you know, it could be around, you know, clients wanting to please the person, particularly if it's, you know, the service provider, the person offering the service is also doing the collecting the data, that can kind of influence potentially the responses that people are giving, but there might be other forms of bias as well. I guess I'm just curious, Kate, I might throw this one to you initially, just because, again, you're coming from that research role. Is this something that we need to be thinking about when we're administering surveys?
I think, you know, aspects like make sure that, you know, in terms of a survey, the way you ask questions, you know, if new players to the game of putting a survey together might inadvertently ask it in a way that does lead towards a particular answer. So that's one thing, but I don't think that's what this question, I'm not sure what this question is asking, but I think Rhonda's already answered this question, I believe, because it's talking about purpose. If, you know, when practitioners are clear about their own purpose, or whoever's asking the questions, it's probably easier for families to see and understand that the information they provide is really valued and it will be used to guide the way that their service provider hopes to work with them in partnership to set goals and develop plans to achieve them. And I think when that happens, if that's, you know, if we're able to achieve that, and people are understanding why these questions are being asked, then, you know, then they're more happy to share their genuine thoughts. But I think that really comes back to what Rhonda's already been talking about.
Yeah. So, Rhonda, do you have anything to add on that question?
Yeah, so I think, sorry, Celeste,
No,
I think
fine,
that, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I think that it is really as like what Kate was saying, but also I think somebody's around that judgment. So, and also we know that a lot of families we have will initially score themselves quite high. And I think, first of all, I share with the practitioners that that's actually a fairly common thing that can occur. And so not to be too worried about it, but it's actually around then the skill of the practitioner to kind of unpack that and to say, oh, that's really interesting. I see you've scored yourself, you know, really high for that. You know, tell me more about that. And a lot of the time it's actually either fear of being judged by the practitioner, so that wanting to please, which can bring in that bias, I guess. And then sometimes it's around, you actually don't know what you don't know. So often what we find is when we go to do the second survey, that's when they'll revisit and you'll say, oh, you know, look at the difference between these two. Like, this is really interesting. Do you want to have a chat around why you've scored differently? And they often then may share actually that if they retrospectively, they're like, oh, I actually didn't really, I thought I knew what was happening there, but I'd probably rate myself differently now because I've learnt so much. And that's actually really valuable once again. So sometimes we can get caught up in, oh, it's not going to meet, the funders are going to see that we haven't shown improvement or whatever it is. But I actually find if you can get the story behind that and share that, that's actually got, that's much more purposeful and meaningful. And you can help the family to have that. And then we also share that back with our funders if we can around, you know, oh, this is actually the story behind that. And this was really useful for us.
Yeah, it's that whole thing of kind of bring different forms of data or sources of data together, really, isn't it, to tell a story, not maybe relying on just one form. I think I could continue this conversation, but it's 1 minute to 2, so we've probably got to wrap up. I just wanted to flag quickly as well that one of the resources that we've published today is around writing surveys, and that can help reduce some bias as well, potentially, in the way that you frame questions, as Kate mentioned before. So we're going to end there, unfortunately, but I'd just really like to have to say a genuine thank you to our panellists, Celeste, Kate and Rhonda. It's been really wonderful having you here to discuss all things using surveys. It's been incredibly valuable, and I have learned a huge amount, as I'm sure everyone else who attended did. Thank you very much to our audience for joining us and asking some really wonderful questions. and to the aifs communications team who are doing the production side of this webinar, and to the broader child and family evidence team as well. So please subscribe to our newsletters if you'd like a recording of this webinar, and also a reminder that there will be a little feedback survey that pops up at the end, and please take the time to do it if you can. So thanks once again. We really look forward to joining you at the next aifs webinar, which will be in 2 weeks' time, on behaviour support for children with disability, working alongside parents. Take care, and we will see you soon. Thanks, Kate, Rhonda and Celeste. Welcome back to the extended Q&A of this webinar. Our panellists have very kindly put aside some extra time to answer some additional questions that we had come through. One of the additional questions that we had is probably best for you, directed at you, Celeste, and it's some people asking a lot about culturally safe and culturally appropriate survey tools. What are some of the things that you consider when looking for a culturally safe tool? You mentioned earlier that, you know, one of the ones that you guys have been given early on was not deemed maybe appropriate or safe. So yeah.
Yeah, yep. So within the context of for VACA and Aboriginal clients, families and workers as well, there's probably the more obvious things like ensuring that language is culturally safe. We also have our tools with some nice artwork on them, so they don't look too formal or clinical. But I think the main factor is looking at the tool and considering what the value system is within it. So there might be questions that are completely irrelevant to Aboriginal children and families, and that are going to score badly on a certain tool, but it's actually not part of their way of living or culture or what's normal or safe for them. So, or for us, I should say. I'm an Aboriginal woman. But yeah, so I think that that's probably the most important thing, is looking at the values that it's aligning with and what it's actually seeking to inform, really. Yeah, that's, and the approach as well is really important. We encourage practitioners and case managers generally not to sit there on their laptop filling in the survey, one, because it mimics a lot of other services that that have inflicted a lot of pain on the children and families that we work with, and also it's not transparent because they're not going to feel comfortable sitting there with the screen facing the worker and the worker speaking for them, really. We need to be transparent and do it as a collaborative approach.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you were talking before about using language that's culturally safe, you're referring to things just trying to use words that wouldn't sort of be harmful or triggering or traumatizing in any way, or using more strength-based language?
Yeah.
Kind of, guidelines around that?
I think it's more about traumatizing or re-traumatizing, or using language that's associated with certain systems or policies or events that would be specific to Aboriginal people, children and families, that would be triggering, and making the language relatable to what's important to Aboriginal communities. So using country, connection to culture, family and kinship, that sort of language resonates with the people that we're working with. So
yeah, and it probably goes without saying that if you're trying to develop a survey that you're going to be using with Aboriginal children and families, that you probably need, it needs to be a collaborative effort. It needs to be really led by Aboriginal people to make sure that it is culturally safe, right?
Yeah, most definitely. So tools and resources that we have at VACA always have working groups with Aboriginal staff on them, and where the opportunity arises, Aboriginal community, Aboriginal families also inform the work and the resources that we develop. So there's always that consultation process to make sure that it's relevant really and appropriate and going to meet the needs of the community.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Les. That's really, I think, really valuable and definitely answers a lot of questions that we had come through on that topic.
Thanks.
The next question that I want to ask is around when to administer a pre and post program survey and the timing around that, because we hear a lot from people around, you know, it can be very difficult to do it in that very first session when you're trying to establish rapport and those things, and maybe, you know, play groups are probably a good example of that, Rhonda. And maybe not necessarily doing it at the very last session when people might not actually show up. Is there wiggle room in there? I might actually just start with Kate first and then I'll come back to you, Rhonda, if that's okay. Are there guidelines around that, Kate? Do you know?
Yeah, I think it is important, as you said, to, if you've got the room and space to do it, to wait until you have developed some rapport with the families before you start the process of you know, obtaining information from them. It's best, you know, not to include a survey, like for instance, in a service intake form, because it's not an administrative set of information. It's something that you will use in your practice to support the family. So if there's, you know, if it's not a short-term one-off program that you're only going to see people for 3 weeks for, and you have to get it now and, you know, in this week and that week, then yes, I'd say, you know, just be guided by the time that you have available, and, you know, make sure you're not rushing people.
Yeah, and it probably goes back to that point Linda was saying before as well, like have a go, like see what works, try some things out. Not everything has to be perfect in terms of doing it in these kind of standards that we talk about. Yeah. Did you have anything you wanted to add on that, Rhonda, given that you are kind of coming from a play group context?
Yeah, definitely. And it can be really challenging, particularly like to do that first survey. And so that's why I think, as you say, that having a go at something and then reflecting on how that worked is initially we were doing them in the first few weeks at the start of the year of kind of playgroup and trying that, and you'd have quite a number to do and it'd be quite difficult. So, which is still kind of the case, but we look at, you know, is there opportunity through that, like what we said, that welcome letter. So we aim for about from week to 3 to 4 onwards. So once they've attended 3 or 4 sessions where we've started to build a relationship, they're getting to know what that playgroup looks like and meeting the staff, and then we would do that little meeting with them. We've also learnt at the start of the year when we have an influx is we'll actually make some time to do that with them before the playgroup sessions get up and going. So the families maybe that came last year and then they've come back, or we know they're going to be attending, we'll spend some time with them before the playgroup sessions start. So once again, it's within the context of building that relationship. And then we actually spend a bit of time balancing across, because we can have 100 and something, I think we survey 150 families across all of our playgroups. So you do need to manage time around how you're doing that, but it needs to be within that context of building a relationship. Same at the end, we're in the process of collecting our surveys now. We have a due date of those by the end of the year, but we would have started that process. We actually monitor and look, well, when did they do their last survey? What's a reasonable amount of time to make that information valid and to show impact? And then when can we slowly start tracking towards getting those done so that they're all completed by the time that we need, but we're not trying to ram them into, you know, 2 or 3 weeks to have them completed. So it actually is having some thought around the timing of doing those, and yeah, and recognizing when a family's ready, or, you know, so that we're not putting undue pressure on them.
Yeah, that's really great advice. Trying to really tailor and tune in to the people that we're working with and provide a response that works for them as well. I'm just going to get final last thoughts on this question, just because it's interesting and it's kind of related. But thoughts on, do we put a time limit on how long you spend with someone doing a survey? Is that ever necessary? Do you need to do that? Thoughts, Celeste?
Well, I mean, like, in a circumstance maybe where the kids are in a hurry to go to swimming lessons or whatever it might be, that might very well be, the family's priority at that time. But in terms of putting the time limit on the family, I definitely think that that's a big no-no, and that the data's not going to be relevant anyway, because then they're not going to care about doing the survey whatsoever. I don't know if that is helpful or not.
Yeah, would you agree, Kate and Rhonda?
Yes, and I think, if you have limited time available.
Yeah, and it is a big challenge because, sorry.
Sorry, will I keep going?
Yeah, keep going, Kate.
Okay, so just picking up on what Celeste said, if you know that there's
sorry, Kate.
going to be limited time available today, then maybe you might ask the first, a couple of questions and say, well, we might pick up on some of these next time we chat, and so split it if you can. If it's something that you can do that without sort of disrupting the flow of what you're talking about, then again, I think it's what you've just been saying, sort of tailor it to what's going on in people's lives and work with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Rhonda, you're trying to say something before.
Yeah, totally agree. Yep, totally agree. Sometimes it can be hard. Like, we have playgroup practitioners who are doing surveys and then running to another, like to actually deliver a group. So I do have to add in, there is a reality around you can't take 2 or 3 hours. So there are some time constraints, but it's being respectful in that conversation. And as Kate's just alluded to, if you can't finish that conversation, don't do all of it and then make it not purposeful or meaningful. Is find that kind of natural segue that kind of concludes that conversation, that you can then pick up the rest of the survey questions at another time, so that you're really being respectful to the family's time if you absolutely can't continue it in that time frame.
Yeah, thank you. I think that well and truly answers that question and has given some really practical advice for anyone that's kind of struggling to do that anyway. I think we'll leave it there. I've definitely taken up enough of your very valuable time. I really, just want to thank you again, Rhonda, Kate and Celeste, for joining us. It's been such a privilege to be here, and really appreciate your very considered comments and thoughts. And I'm sure our audiences did too. So thank you as well to all that audience for joining us and sticking with us this far. We'll see you at the next AIFS webinar. Bye.